Welcome back to part two of HCBS Why It Matters. If you haven't watched part one of HCBS Why It Matters, please pause this video and find that one and start there. It should be linked below. If you've already watched part one, thanks for making your way back. This training was specifically designed for friends and family members and other circles of support. But regardless of who you are, we hope that you find this information helpful.
We are Allo Consultation. We are a small consulting firm based out of Benicia, California. We've contracted with North Bay Regional Center to provide training and technical assistance related to home and community based services, or HCBS. We work throughout California giving this type of consultation and training to people receiving services and supports from the Regional Center, service providers, families, and other loved ones and Regional Center staff. We'll tell you a little bit about ourselves. Jackie and I are co founders of Allo Consultation. I like to share with people that I got my start in this field as a support staff, a DSP. I did that work mostly in residential homes, sometimes in day programs. I earned my master's degree in education in 2014. Prior to starting Allo, I worked at a Bay Area regional center in quality assurance, which is where I met Jacqueline. And I'll pass it over to her to tell you a little bit about herself.
Hi, everyone. My name's Jackie Lawton, and I'm thrilled to be here with you today to share this critical content. I started working in this field at a day program, and the experience changed me and really shaped so much of what I still think about every day in my work. I worked for a short while in the special education classroom as well with transition age young adults and teenagers. And I later found myself at the regional center in the quality assurance department and then moved to be the HCBS specialist there for a couple of years. I've also worked with people with disabilities in Latin America, and I hope to be able to do that even more in the future. I believe that our work in the provider services field and the regional center has set us up to be able to give you a unique perspective that hopefully feels like it's full of compassion and understanding.
We wrote Why It Matters for family members and other circles of support to those who receive services and supports through North Bay Regional Center. We created this training as a way to acknowledge these important relationships. We want loved ones and the people you support to know that these home and community based service rights matter and are helping people with disabilities all over the country live the lives they want to live. In part one, we looked at the context of HCBS, the roles and responsibilities, about which providers are on the service code list. We explored why HCBS even matters, why it's important. We then talked about some of the myths and misconceptions that get in the way of people living dignified lives and how we can change our minds and hearts to try new things. In this part of the training, we'll be looking at the HCBS final rule. We'll be exploring all 10 of the federal requirements, major themes of HCBS, and who you can reach out to if you would like more support. This is the same request we had in part one, but we'll say it again. The one request we are asking of you as you make your way through this training. Some of what you might hear in this training may be exciting, or it may be hard to hear. You might hear something and think, there's absolutely no way, or how is that even going to be possible? All of these feelings and thoughts are valid. And I want you to try your absolute best to press pause on these thoughts and feelings for now. For the rest of the time we have together, we're asking you to set aside any ideas you might already have or any strong feelings that come up and to meet us here with a humble, compassionate, and questioning mind and heart. And I'll share with you that we commit to doing the same.
We're going to be showing you all 10 of the HCBS federal requirements. The first 5 are for both residential and day and employment service codes. Take a moment to briefly look these over, but just know that we're going to be going through each one in detail soon. Here are federal requirements 6 through 10. Again, these are only for residential services, but we think it's important for all service codes and programs to be thinking about federal requirement number 10. Okay, so let's take a look at federal requirement number 1. The setting is integrated in and supporting full access of individuals receiving Medicaid HCBS to the greater community, including opportunities to seek employment and work in competitive integrated settings, engage in community life, control personal resources, and receive services in the community to the same degree of access as individuals not receiving Medicaid HCBS. Now, I think that federal requirement one is a really wonderful requirement to start out with because it does set the tone. It sets the tone and that we are looking at the word setting and getting to understand who and what that might be. When we give this training to service providers, we tell service providers the setting is you. But this may not always be the case, right? The setting can be anybody who is giving services and supports. That's how we like to think about it. Now, if you take a good look at this language, what you're going to see is that the main point here is all about community. Community, community, community. What happens inside of it, what happens within it, and who gets to decide when community is good enough or when it's not good enough. The most important thing to consider here is what does community mean to the person or to a person in your life? What does community mean to the person, to you, or anybody? Those things might be very different. My idea of community is very different from your idea of community, more than likely. I find community when I'm dancing salsa. I find community when I'm walking on the beach alone. I like to be walking around other people, but not necessarily talking to them or engaging with them. Seeing other people around me makes me feel like I'm in community. I really enjoy being able to choose and change how I am in my community, and sometimes I change every day. Sometimes what I want in my community changes by the hour or by the minute. All of these different decisions that somebody who is not receiving regional center services gets to make about who they have in their life and in their community. That's the same type of opportunity and access that we're talking about here for the people that you care about. This really opens up the entire world. This really opens up opportunity. What's the first thing to do here? So, I think the first thing to do is to find out, like I said before, what does community mean to the person that you care about? Really, that's the bulk of this work because how can you support somebody in their chosen community if you don't know what it is? And this can be really challenging for so many reasons. The first reason that comes to mind is that the person may or may not be practiced in sharing with the people in their world and their life what community means to them. Some people might not have ever been asked a question like this and have never considered a life where they can go to school or go get a job or just walk down to the coffee shop or start online dating. We're really moving away from supporting engagement in undignified types of community life. What do I mean by this? Think about sheltered workshops or subminimum wage work. Think about day programs where people are not really doing much, where people are kind of moving from room to room or going from activity to activity, where there's not a lot truly going on, where there's not a lot of meaningful activity that truly means something to someone. It may be a predetermined activity, perhaps, or moving away from, we are completely moving away from that and really moving towards supporting folks and engaging with their life in a way that means something. Now, that's going to require a lot of change. That's going to require our system to change. And it's going to require programs that people choose to be involved in to change. And it's going to require us to ask different questions. So, if you're a family member or somebody who cares for somebody who receives services and supports, then this is the job. And it may not be comfortable all the time. It may push you to consider some new things and push you into some new territory. So, this training is specifically for people who are family members or friends or conservators or guardians. And we are really deeply encouraging you here to do whatever you possibly can to find out what community means to this person in your life and do whatever you possibly can to support them in engaging with that. Now, I want to say a word here about possibility. There's a lot of things about community that I want in my life that I don't currently have. I would love to be able to own my own house in the neighborhood of my dreams and have the friendliest neighbors that invite me over for a cup of tea. And I may not have access to that right now, but I know that I want this. And I know that I'm able to talk to people in my life about it and plan for it as I can. This is all about getting in touch with desire, getting in touch with interest, and getting in touch with new thoughts, new ideas. It does not necessarily mean that everything's going to be magically available to us exactly how we desire it. We're talking about the end of seclusion. We're talking about the end of work that doesn't mean anything, about the end of school and education that doesn't mean anything. We're talking about the end of day program activities that don't mean anything, and about the end of community life that doesn't mean anything, and really doing the deep, deep work to get to a place where we can find and support true pockets of inclusion and community for the people that we're talking about and that we care about. It may not be possible to have continuously meaningful community activity all of the time. That is something that I wish I had more of. We were absolutely gearing up towards supporting a life that means something. And this is what federal requirement number 1 is all about.
Here we are at HCBS Federal Requirement Number 2. The setting is selected by the individual from among various setting options, including non-disability specific settings and an option for a private unit in a residential setting. The setting options are identified and documented in the person-centered service plan and are based on the individual's needs, preferences, and for residential settings, resources available for room and board. Let's start with the setting. When we're talking about the setting here, we may be talking about a residential setting or a day or employment setting. Not only are we talking about the setting as the place or the program, but we're talking about the services and supports within that program. We're also talking about the people who deliver these services and supports, or the service provider. So, this federal requirement is saying that when it comes to settings, remember, this means where people live or where they spend their time during the day, whether it's an employment or a day program, that they have options. Not only is this saying that folks have the right to have options, but it's also saying that these options should include non disability specific settings. Now, what's a non disability specific setting? It's anywhere where folks who do not have disabilities can also access. This is saying that people with disabilities have the right to be in non disabled spaces. So let's spend a little time talking about non disability specific settings. First, for residential, what might this be? Renting an apartment, living with friends, moving in with your partner, living with family. These are just a few options. Now, for what people do during the day, what are some non disability specific settings? Night classes, attending a club, going to the gym, being a dog walker. There are so many possibilities. Okay, so we've talked about what a non disability specific setting is. Let's talk about the rest of this federal requirement. This is saying that whatever setting folks are currently in, that they chose that one from a variety of options, including non disability specific options, and that this choice is documented or written in their service plan. In California, we call this an IPP. So, who is doing the documenting? Since this federal requirement mentions the service plan, it lets us know that this is a regional center responsibility, the responsibility of the service coordinator. Now, this is how regional centers can show that this is happening through the documentation. But if we're looking at the heart of this federal requirement, what it is really saying, it's very clear. People with disabilities have the right to live where they want to live, to do what they want to do during the day. So, in my eyes, if we are truly honoring this federal requirement, the responsibility of making sure this federal requirement is happening doesn't just fall on the service coordinator. And it certainly doesn't happen that one time when someone moves into their home or starts a new day program. This is an ongoing conversation that happens often, that checks in with people to see if they are satisfied, to see if they feel like they're working towards their goals, whatever that might be. Now, and you'll see that this is a running theme through these federal requirements. This does not mean that possibilities are endless. When the federal government says in this federal requirement that people have the option for a private unit, they're not saying that everyone suddenly gets their own private condo or in law unit. We live in California, folks. Housing is expensive. There is a shortage of general housing, let alone housing within our system. And just as we are taking into account people's needs and preferences, we are also taking into consideration resources available.
HCBS federal requirement number 3. The setting ensures an individual's rights of privacy, dignity, and respect, as well as freedom from coercion and restraint. This should already be happening. And it's true. It should already be happening. All of these words are familiar: rights, privacy, dignity, respect. What I think is pretty radical about this federal requirement is that the federal government is spelling out freedom from coercion and restraint. But before we get into that section, let's start from the beginning. The setting, HCBS setting, whether that's residential or non residential, the setting ensures an individual's rights of privacy, dignity, and respect. Now, how can anybody, ensure they are respecting somebody else's right to privacy? In order to answer this question, it's critical to find out what privacy means to that person, and that can be complicated. That can be hard work. Just like we talked about in federal requirement number 1, in order to support somebody in accessing their types of community or their chosen community, you have to find out what community means to them. What's important to them about community? How can I ensure I'm respecting someone's privacy if I'm not sure what it means to them? This is a big deal because a lot of people in this system aren't used to having privacy. If you're living in a group home with roommates with people who are not your family, privacy can be hard to come by. Frequently, there's little time to be alone. You're often sharing so many things. People might need extra support with getting dressed, taking medication, with personal care. I've met a lot of people in the state who don't really know what it's like to have privacy. They may not be practiced or used to talking about this even. This is a really big deal, and the main invitation for you is to have this conversation and to dig in deep and talk about privacy. Next, let's talk about dignity and respect. I love that they are included in this federal requirement, but what makes it tricky is that dignity and respect, just like privacy and community, can mean different things to different people. So it's important to figure out what they mean to the person in your life. Let's think about what dignity and respect mean to most people. To most people, it means, many different things. It means being treated like you matter. It means being treated like you're an adult or a human being. There are lots of different ways to show someone dignity or respect. It might mean looking at someone in the eye, shaking their hand, or using someone's name and looking directly at them instead of at someone supporting them. It might mean watching your tone of voice that you're using when you're talking to someone receiving supports, or making sure there's no childlike tone. And this can be hard work. This is something people have to work on every day, especially the people who work in this field. And as a family member or friend, this can also be tough because you might have a very familiar relationship with this person. A question to ask is, what do most people do in parent-child relationships to show dignity and respect? Well, the first answer that comes to my mind is that they support their adult children in making choices about their own lives.
Here's federal requirement number 4. The setting optimizes but does not regiment individual initiative, autonomy, and independence in making life choices, including but not limited to daily activities, physical environment, and with whom to interact. This is saying that the setting is supporting folks in making life choices, not just supporting folks in doing this, but that the setting is optimizing this experience, that it is enhancing this experience, that it is making this experience even better than it would be if the person were doing it on their own. Well, how can you optimize the experience of making life choices? The federal government gives us a few ways. This experience is made better when someone's individual initiative, their ability and desire to take charge of making decisions about their life, is supported. This experience is also made better when autonomy, feeling like you're in control of your own life, is supported. And ultimately, this experience of making life choices is optimized when people are getting to experience the greatest level possible of independence when making these life choices. When I think about what makes me feel good about making my life choices, this stuff is pretty basic. So, how can the settings support this initiative, autonomy, independence in making life choices? One of the major ways we see service providers supporting with federal requirement number 4 is through informed choice. We talked a little bit about informed choice in part 1 of this training, but this is the idea that people have the right to have the information they need to be able to make a choice. This includes knowing the benefits and consequences of making a certain choice. Now, anytime I say this in a training, we have someone raise their hand and say, but they don't understand. Even if you support them with informed choice, they don't really understand. I'm going to push us back to that mindset shift in part one. And we're going to sprinkle in some dignity of risk and some presumed competence here. It is universally hard, meaning across all relationships, whether someone has a disability or not, it is hard to watch someone you love or care about make a choice that you believe is not going to end well. And as adults in this world, the federal government is saying that people with disabilities still have the right to experience risk, just as you or I do. Not life threatening risk, but the risk of something being disappointing or not working out as you thought it might. And moving out of the way for someone to have this adult experience is presuming competence, is presuming that they know best about their own life and how they want it to look. Okay, that was a lot. I'm going to bring us back to this federal requirement. So, we've talked a lot about choice and how people make choices. Let's talk about what folks with disabilities are now making choices about. Well, this says life choices. It's kind of vague. And then it says one of these funny phrases, including but not limited to. This phrase tells me something big. It tells me that when the federal government says life choices, they don't mean certain life choices. They don't mean a few things. They mean all life choices. This is huge. And as big as this is, they do point us to a few specific places. What people do during the day, where they are, and the people that they interact with. Even though CMS has given us a few important places where people have the right to make choices, they're still pretty big categories. This federal requirement is saying that people with disabilities have the right to design what their lives look like and that they will be supported to be able to do so. This is a great segue into Federal Requirement 5, which is all about choice.
HCBS Federal Requirement Number 5. The setting facilitates individual choice regarding services and supports and who provides them. I really love this federal requirement because it looks really simple and sounds kind of similar to the federal requirement we just looked at, number 4, because it's about choice, but it's pointing out a different piece here. It's talking specifically about being able to choose one's services and supports, and specifically what staff people are in a person's life. While those of us who have been working in this field and who have been a part of this system for a long time know that this should be happening, it has never explicitly been said like this. Even if somebody does not have a reason for not wanting a particular person to work with them, that's okay. They don't have to have a reason. The thing that is required here is doing our absolute best, everything within our power to honor someone's request. And sometimes that request can't be completely honored right away because of many, many different reasons, but doing our absolute best to honor that person's choice and honor that person's experience is the thing we're talking about. The reasons that a person may not want a particular staff to work with them might be private. They may not want to share about it, and that's okay. It could be personal, but maybe not. Maybe it's not private, and maybe it's not personal. Maybe it's just a feeling or a thought, and that's okay too. There doesn't need to be a big reason either. I want to talk about consequence here because with any conversation around choice, I think there also needs to be a conversation around consequence. We hear a lot of people misinterpret federal requirements 4 and 5. They think these requirements are saying people can choose anything and get it 100% of the time in exactly the way they want. And that's not what this is because that's not the real world. So if we're really treating folks with dignity and respect, we're supporting folks, as we've already talked about, in experiencing the dignity of risk. And if people are experiencing the dignity of risk, then they are experiencing all that comes with making certain decisions. And there might be specific consequences to choosing a particular staff person or changing one's mind about having a particular staff person. Somebody might choose a staff person, change their mind, and then change their mind again and say, oh, actually, I want that staff person back in my life. But then that person's not available anymore. And this is a natural consequence. This is why it's important to talk about informed choice, why it's important to support folks in understanding what the options are and what's possible. So, in this case, we're talking about staff, but we're also talking about services and supports. I think this sounds a little vague. Why do I think it sounds vague? Well, there's different words across that we use across this entire nation. Remember, these are federal requirements. So there's different states all over this country that are interpreting these federal requirements. So I think mostly this particular federal requirement is talking about services and supports that are paid for, probably by the state. But I also like to believe that this goes beyond just paid supports or services, like someone's primary healthcare physician or provider, or maybe a type of therapist. And I think that there may be a nod or a wink towards non disability specific settings, and maybe even moving beyond disability specific settings here. Almost like it's an extension of federal requirement number 2, which is just something interesting to think about. I think federal requirement 4 and 5 do a really good job of capturing that the main message is that folks have the right to make choices about anything in their lives. And not only do they have that right, but people in their circles, people who are in their lives should be helping them in realizing this. Service providers should be helping them. Regional centers should be helping them. Hopefully, family members are also helping them to experience more autonomy and more dignity and more independence and respect so that folks can make choices that maybe previously weren't an option. I'll tell you, more often than not, we've come across people with disabilities, adults with disabilities, who have less choice, who have more experience with limited choices in their life. And so sometimes when we talk about increased choices and maybe even choices that carry a lot of risk with them or that feel uncomfortable to observe or watch a loved one make, it's really hard, and that's understandable. It's a really universal experience that human beings feel when they watch somebody that they care about making decisions that we feel might not be good, safe, or healthy decisions. But I just want to say that the scale has been tipped and unbalanced. The scale's been lopsided for a long time. What I mean by that is people with disabilities tend in this world and in this community to have less choice. They don't have the experience of making lots of choices and lots of practice and getting to choose from different options. But now, this lopsided scale, it's getting more balanced now. As the scale shifts and things change, it might make a lot of people uncomfortable. It's a big shift and it's a big change in the way that we are and be with people with disabilities. We do work with people with disabilities and we talk about these federal requirements. We talk about these rights and how they are part of their lives and should be supported and should be honored. And even folks receiving services can get uncomfortable with this and can be suddenly like, I don't want to. I don't want to make more choices, or more choices make me nervous, or I'm not sure. I don't want to choose right now. And again, that's a normal human experience to potentially feel overwhelmed with choice. So it's really important to know that all these changes aren't expected overnight. And it's just recognizing how important it can be as a person in a person's circle of support to say, hey, I'm making a commitment to you. I'm making a commitment as a brother or as a sister, mother or father or friend, as a conservator or a guardian, to do whatever I can to advocate for you and understanding what your choices are and helping you exercise the right to make any decision about any part of your life.
Okay, here we are at Federal Requirement 6. I have so many thoughts and feelings about Federal Requirement 6, but I'll start by giving you the Federal Requirement language here. The unit or dwelling is a specific physical place that can be owned, rented, or occupied under a legally enforceable agreement by the individual receiving services. And the individual has, at a minimum, the same responsibilities and protections from eviction that tenants have under the landlord tenant law of the state, county, city, or other designated entity. For settings in which landlord tenant laws do not apply, state must ensure that a lease, residency agreement, or other form of written agreement will be put in place for each HCBS participant, and that the document provides protections that address eviction processes and appeals comparable to those provided under the jurisdiction's landlord tenant law. Now, what is being said here? This is a lot of information. It's definitely the most wordy of all the federal requirements, and for me, one of the least straightforward. There are a couple main takeaways I want you to really get here. I go immediately to this place that says that folks with disabilities have the same rights and responsibilities. Rights and responsibilities as any other tenant in California. Or if you're in Missouri, Missouri, or if you're in New York City, New York City, as any other tenant in Solano County, as any other tenant in Santa Rosa. This is saying that just as you or I have rights and responsibilities as a tenant, especially when it comes to eviction, people with disabilities have those same rights and responsibilities. This is really working to address unlawful eviction. And the federal government goes a step further, stating that not only is this a right, but that this right needs to be outlined in some sort of legally enforceable agreement. Or we're also given the word lease. And we know that many regional centers are considering admission agreements to be sufficient as long as they have the language outlined in Federal Requirement 6 included in that admission agreement. Also, at the heart of this federal requirement is something really important. I want to say that the next part of what I'm going to talk about might be a little hard. It is not where our system currently is, and that can make it difficult to talk about. It's like this big elephant in the room that no one wants to talk about because then it makes it real. And we have to acknowledge that this is not what is happening and that our system is not currently set up for it to happen this way. What this federal requirement is really trying to address here is that housing and services and supports can be delivered separately. They can be separated. In our current model, where you live determines most of the services and supports that are provided to you. Now, under this federal requirement, can your housing and other services be delivered by the same provider? Yes, absolutely. If that is what is desired. Remember, we just talked about some major choice in federal requirements 4 and 5. People with disabilities have the right to choose everything in their lives. People with disabilities have the right to choose their services and supports. People with disabilities have the right to choose their staff and service providers who provide those services and supports. The service options are no longer just what is offered by the home. See what I mean when I say this is a major departure from how our system has been, how it is currently? This piece, the separation of housing from services, will not be an overnight fix. There's a lot that would need to happen for this aspect of Federal Requirement 6 to become a reality. But I think it's important that we have our eye on where our field and services are headed and what might be coming.
HCBS Federal Requirement Number 7. Each individual has privacy in their sleeping or living unit. 1. Units have entrance doors lockable by the individual, with only appropriate staff having keys to doors. 2. Individuals sharing units have a choice of roommates in that setting. 3. Individuals have the freedom to furnish and decorate their sleeping or living units within that lease or other agreement. I really appreciate the clarity and the simplicity of this requirement. We've already talked about privacy in Federal Requirement 3, but in this requirement, we're talking about privacy in the home, about privacy in somebody's living quarters or sleeping area or bedroom. So, point blank, the main message at the very top is that folks have the right to privacy where they live, and it doesn't necessarily specify that it's just a bedroom. It says where they sleep or their living unit or quarters. First, we're looking at units that have entrance doors that are lockable by the person who lives in that room or lives in that home or lives in that unit. I just want to say at this moment in time, when we're recording this training, this has really caught on across the state of California, and we're seeing a lot of service providers jump on this in a really meaningful way. And what I mean by that is that they're not just putting locks on doors and saying, okay, here's the key, you have a lock on your door now. They're saying, Hey, we're going to be putting a lock on your door. How do you feel about this? What does this mean to you? This is your key. This is how you use the key. If you need extra keys, let us know. Okay, you don't want a traditional or regular looking key or lock? Let's think about other types of locks, other types of keys, and ways to enter your room. There's an opportunity to be creative here and think about different solutions depending on what kinds of needs or desires a person has. It might be easier for the person to use a biometric lock where they're putting their thumbprint down. Maybe it's easier to have the ability to have a push pen lock. There's so many different types of locks that go on doors. And so it's very, very interesting for us to see all the very creative solutions that service providers across the state are doing and using. And they're coming up not just with those solutions, but they're really supporting folks in understanding how to use it. A lot of people with disabilities in the state may not have ever been given the option to have a lock on their door. This can be a really big deal. And what we hear a lot is, I put a lock on the door, but they don't even use it. It's like, okay, well, that's fine. I have a lock on my door and I don't really use it all the time, but I do use it sometimes when I want to. And so the heart of this is, does the person understand that they have the option to be alone? Does this person understand that they have the ability to close a door, lock it, and have complete privacy? Do they understand that what they might do with this privacy or a locked door alone or with someone? There's a lot of what ifs that come up with this. What if the person has a seizure disorder? What if the person has a history of self harm? What if the person doesn't want a lock? What if they share a room and one person wants a lock and the other one doesn't? How do we know which staff are considered to be quote unquote appropriate? The answers to these questions are going to be different for everybody because, well, everyone's different. There's no stock answer here. If anybody ever tries to give you a stock answer for any of these questions, be wary, be careful, because really this is about the person that you are supporting. And there might be a special circumstance that needs specific resources and specific support. So I say generally that making sure that the residential service provider is not the only person who is involved in making decisions is very, very important. Not because we don't love our residential service providers, but because it's very important to have a whole team understanding here. Who does this person consider to be their planning team? Who does this person consider to be a trusted member to get support with their decision making processes, if anybody? Are they supporting this process if they are available and interested and able to? I think there's a lot of ways to respect someone's privacy. It's critical that residential service providers are balancing health and safety and the inherent risks of there being more privacy in someone's life, but also really valuing just as much as valuing that risk, also valuing the ability to be alone and the ability to experience privacy. The big piece of homework here is to support folks in understanding what a lock means, what it could do for somebody, how they might use it, and making sure that if needed, there's a safety plan in place. The second piece of this is that individuals in group home settings or shared living spaces have a choice of roommates. So this is a very, very cool, big deal. Why? Because this hasn't really ever been the case. Some service providers are very, very good at this already, but it's never really been said in this particular way before this federal requirement. So I'd say generally at this point in time, or at this time when this content is being recorded right now, there's a big move and shift away from group homes where 6 people live. That's really what the traditional model looked like. Like 15 years ago, there was a lot of group homes where 6 people lived in a home, and there were 3 bedrooms and 2 people living in each bedroom. And there's been a big shift away from that. So I think a lot of regional centers are supporting new service providers and existing service providers in creating opportunities for people to live in their own bedroom and not have a roommate. But there's still plenty of homes in California, and I'm sure all over this country, where there's a roommate situation. I don't think that this federal requirement is saying roommate situations are not allowed. There's a lot of people who are not receiving services, who do not have a disability, who live in a roommate situation. And that's a good way for them to live. It's very clear that if a person is sharing a bedroom or a unit with another person, that they must be able to choose who that person is. That's what this is saying. Well, this should have been a clear choice and been honored in a major way before. Here we are now, and this is the path. Let's look at number 3 here. So many service providers are so fantastic at doing this and supporting folks in decorating and furnishing their space however they'd like to. And then there's some service providers that struggle with this, and it's understandable why they might struggle with it. There's some homes that support people who have a lot of medical or behavioral needs, and there may not be as much opportunity for this particular person to communicate and express what kinds of decorations or furnishings they would like to have in their space or in their home. In some homes, the conversation just doesn't come up because communication might be really challenging. Sometimes homes can look really nice, like maybe you're walking into a hotel room, and there's not always a lot of personality, and you might not know who this person is when you are coming into their bedroom. It's not always the case, however, and it's not a requirement necessarily for us to be able to see someone's personality when we walk into their bedroom. But typically, that is what happens, right? So, typically, when you see someone's bedroom or living space or personal living space, you can see what's important to them. That's what I think this is really about. It's making sure that the home feels like a home to a person. So, what does this mean? It maybe means considering that if the house is being shared, if service providers or staff are also living on the premises as well, asking whose decorations are up in the living room. Is it the service providers or the staff people's? One of the things that we see a lot is staff people's items or family photos up in the living room because they live there as well. But none of the folks receiving services have anything up in the living room. So these are just some of the things that we've seen, some of the things to be aware of. And if it's not your experience, that's great.
Federal Requirement 8. Individuals have the freedom and support to control their own schedules and activities and have access to food at any time. This federal requirement is very straightforward. It means exactly what it says. Now, of course, this can be quite complicated when we start to think about how this might be applied to our loved ones or folks that we know really well. So let's break this one down into two parts. First, we're going to talk about the first part. Individuals have the freedom and support to control their own schedules and activities. Now, this is saying that people have the right to create their own schedules, including what they do inside of those schedules. Not only are they free to do this, but they have support in doing this. We're not just saying, okay, you can create your own schedule, go ahead. We're talking about people who have been told their entire lives what to do, where to go. People who have been shuffled around from place to place that they did not choose or determine. And now we're saying, okay, you get to decide. No, absolutely, that is not good enough. So, what does support look like when we're talking about this level of freedom and control? First of all, informed choice is critical, so important. How can someone create the schedule of their dreams when they don't really know what is possible? How can someone create the schedule of their dreams when they don't know what a typical adult schedule looks like? How can someone create the schedule of their dreams when they've never had the opportunity to try out something new and decide, no, that really isn't for me? Secondly, part of informed choice is supporting someone in understanding their context. I'll tell you about myself and my schedule. I'm an adult with a reasonable amount of control and autonomy when it comes to my schedule and what I do. And I definitely don't get everything that I want all the time, even if much of it is my choice. Here are a few examples. I might decide that I want a 4-day weekend. This fits in really well with the amount of time that I want to spend resting and with my family. And guess what? I might not be able to find an employer that will do this. If I told my current employer about this desire, they might not feel like that was a good fit for what they want or need. And at that point, it would be up to me to decide what's more important to me, having that 4-day weekend that I want for my schedule or getting to keep my current job. This federal requirement is also about people getting to have freedom and flexibility in their schedule. Now, in my schedule, I have certain commitments that I don't have a lot of flexibility with. A couple of these are preschool drop off for my son. I have to do that around 9 a.m. And my job, I start work around 10 a.m. Now, I have these two commitments that really I have to do pretty much at that time every weekday. Their start times are not flexible. And between dropping my son off and starting work, I have about a half hour where I get to decide what I want to do. Sometimes I stop at a cafe and grab a coffee. Sometimes I start work early and check my emails. Sometimes I go for a walk or scroll on my phone. It's up to me how I decide to spend that time. And it doesn't need to be written down in my schedule, and I don't need to check in with anyone about it. The last thing I'll say about supporting someone with controlling their own schedules and activities is that this is also about exposure. This is about someone having the information they need so that they can know and understand what is possible for their life, what is possible for their schedule, and what is possible for their activities. Truly supporting someone in this exploration requires stepping outside of yourself, your values, and what you think is good and important and worthwhile. Truly supporting someone in this exploration means being willing to open up their world and yours so that when they make a decision about their lives, it's a true decision, not one that's being made because it's the only option they know about. Okay, now let's take a look at the second part of this federal requirement. Individuals have access to food at any time. I want you to notice that this sentence doesn't have any qualifiers. It does not say access to healthy food. It does not say access to food at any time between 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. It does not say access to food at any time unless you have this diagnosis or that situation. This is really, really simple and really, really straightforward. Now, let's talk about why it can be challenging to support someone in having access to food at any time. There's quite a few scenarios that we often hear, mostly from service providers, but sometimes from regional center staff and family members. One thing that we hear is that someone would keep going, that they would eat a whole box of donuts or that they would drink 15 Coca Colas. Before I dive in, I want to say that there is no way to know this. I cannot tell you how many times I have supported a service provider or a DSP who knows something about someone or knows how a situation will turn out, and they end up being wrong. This is why presumed competence and supporting the dignity of risk is critical. Now, as much as I'm going to message to you the right to adult status and supporting the dignity of risk, I've also worked in this field for a long time, and I know that someone drinking 15 Coca Colas is a possibility. And limiting someone's access to food is not up to their mother or brother. It's not up to their service provider. It's not up to their service coordinator. This is a planning team conversation and decision. And when I say that this is a planning team conversation and decision, what I'm saying is that the person receiving supports is at the very center of this conversation. And so, unless this has been discussed, documented, consented to, the expectation is that this is happening. Another thing we hear is that someone likes eating whatever is served to them, or that they like going out to eat in a group with all of their housemates, or that they only really like going out to eat at McDonald's, or that they've never even asked for food outside of meal times before. There's lots of situations here that I hear justifying not truly supporting this right. And in response to all of this, I'll point you back to informed choice. Does the person know that they can eat outside of meal times? Not just that they can, but that they have the right to eat at any time. Do they know that? And not just have they been told that, but have they been truly supported in understanding that this is the case? Have they been supported in understanding that they don't need to ask permission for food? Have they been supported in being a part of grocery shopping and meal planning? When we talk about informed choice, we're not just telling people you can have something other than McDonald's. We're truly supporting them in exploring any and all options available to you and to me. What does exploration mean? It means someone might try something and not like it. It means someone might want to eat their meal somewhere that isn't the dinner table. I like to eat a lot of my meals on the couch while watching Netflix. It means that someone might discover that they love eating steak out at a restaurant. And then at the end of the month, might find out that eating steak out at restaurants too often is sort of out of their budget. I'll end this federal requirement by saying that this is incredibly challenging and exciting work. To be supporting someone with true informed choice and exploration when they may have never had that in their lives, or may have had a very watered down, limited version of that in their lives. This is once again us moving forward into a new way of being with folks with disabilities.
HCBS federal requirement number 9. Individuals are able to have visitors of their choosing at any time. This is a federal requirement specifically for home and community based residential services. Historically, people living in group homes or other types of residential settings may not have always had access to visitors of their choosing at any time. At this moment in time, we're moving into a different way where folks are not only having visitors either during the day or overnight, but they are also supported in developing and maintaining relationships. They are being supported potentially with transportation, knowing how to lock their door, knowing how to have private visits or what might go into visits. It's critical that service providers are supporting folks' baseline and understanding that this is their right and making sure that they continue to remind people they support that this is their right as much as possible. Service providers might also need to support group discussions during resident meetings or house meetings to talk about what agreements might be within the house between the people living in the home. One of the main types of discussions that can happen during these meetings is about visitors. So while everyone in the home has a right to have visitors of their choosing at any time, one person having visitors at any time does not mean that other residents forego their privacy or that their opinions do not matter. In any group living situation or shared living situation, visitors can be a challenging topic and experience, and it can be especially important to have frequent and routine discussions about how everyone is feeling. If there are two people sharing one room and one person wants to have an overnight visitor, it's going to require even more discussion to make sure everyone is feeling like their space and their personhood is respected. We've seen service providers already in California coming up with really creative solutions to support people having the visitors of their choice when they'd like to. Sometimes it might not be possible to have somebody come over at 11 o'clock at night because other residents might like to wake up early. And maybe there's a house agreement in place that says that there are no overnight visitors after a certain time. It's okay for that to be a house agreement. What is not okay anymore is for the service provider or the house manager, administrator, house staff to say what those rules are. Agreements about what happens in the house should be made by the people living in the home, as it is their home. When we talk to service providers about supporting this right to have visitors, we talk a lot about house meetings, but we also talk about what policies are for the home. And we hope that these policies for the home are also created by and developed with and by the people who live in the home. When we talk to family members, parents, or conservators about their adult child or an adult they support who is living in a group living situation and having the right to visitors, we try to talk about it in the sense of advocacy. While it may be difficult for a lot of parent child relationships to talk about visitors or overnight guest experiences, we'd like to encourage family members, conservators, and guardians to take the role of the advocate here and support their adult child or person they are supporting in having the same types of experiences or opportunities regarding relationships, privacy, and visitors that other adults might experience. In the context of people receiving home and community based services who are not 18 and older, it might be helpful to think about what an age appropriate experience might look like. The invitation here for you is to think about what's common for most people of this age, what's appropriate for most people this age, whether that's 18 and older or 18 and under. What would be the respectful and dignified experience for anybody this age? And how can you, knowing this person, knowing what they might like to experience in their life, support them in experiencing this?
Let's talk about federal requirement number 10. The setting is physically accessible to the individual. By now, you've figured out that there are some repeat themes across these federal requirements. So we're going to go back to Federal Requirement 1 and talk about the concepts of access and accessibility. When we're considering a setting to be accessible, we're not just talking about ramps and grab bars for ease of getting around. This federal requirement is not saying that the setting will be barrier free. It's saying that the setting will be accessible. So let's explore what that can mean. Just as we discussed in Federal Requirement 1 with access to the community, we're thinking about what in the setting needs to change or be in place for it to be considered accessible. I like to start with being able to enter all parts of a person's home. The setting is accessible when someone can go into all parts of their home that is not another person's private bedroom. This includes the garage, the backyard, the front yard, any bathrooms that aren't attached to someone's bedroom, the kitchen. Why am I even mentioning these rooms? Because oftentimes when we visit homes, we see that people do not have access to these spaces. But remember what I said about barrier free. These spaces should not just be barrier free. That is the absolute bare minimum. They should be accessible. This means that folks know that they exist. They know that this is, in fact, a part of what they have access to within their home. They know the purpose of those spaces and how to use and navigate them. That is having true accessibility. When we talk about accessibility, we're also talking about how people get around, how easy it is for people to get around, how enjoyable it is to get around, and how that can change over time. People do not stay the same over time, and their needs don't either. Their space and support that they get should reflect this changing. Great. So we've covered spaces and rooms in homes, but a room is not all that a setting is made up of. We're not just talking about accessing rooms, we're talking about overall accessibility. So, what does this involve? We're talking about furniture, being able to use any and all furniture in the home easily. And if it is not easy, having accommodations so that that furniture is more greatly accessible. We're also talking about appliances within the home: washing machine, dryer, stove, microwave, blender, dishwasher. We're talking about fixtures. We're talking about lighting, televisions, blinds, fans. These are all a part of someone's home, and they deserve to have the greatest access possible to them. I want to give you a simple example here to talk about accessibility in the home. We'll talk about coffee. Coffee is something that is really, really important to me. And I want to be able to have some independence in getting my coffee. Okay, so thinking about accessibility and getting myself a cup of coffee, I first have to know that I can enter the kitchen. It may seem strange to start here, but across many, many ARFs, adult residential facilities, that I've visited, I will watch people in their own home walk right up to the line where the kitchen starts and stop right there. Like there's a gate there. What do I think is going on? I think there is an invisible, an unwritten, maybe even an unspoken rule that says you do not go in the kitchen. Staff will handle it. You get what you want or need by asking permission. Well, That doesn't seem like an accessible space, right? Okay, so back to my coffee example. I need to first of all know that I can enter the kitchen. Inside the kitchen, I have to know where the coffee is kept and where the coffee maker is. I would need to be able to reach both of those things in order to make my coffee. Not only this, but I have to be able to operate the coffee maker. Probably I would need access to water and something to carry the water over to the coffee maker in. I may need someone to help me at any point along the way or at many points along the way. This could be opening the bag of coffee, grinding the coffee, collecting the water, or pouring it in, or maybe opening the coffee pod and inserting it, pressing a button, or even assistance in drinking the coffee. This is how deep accessibility can go for just one thing in someone's life. Something as simple as getting your own cup of coffee. Why do I love this example? Because coffee is very important to a lot of people with and without disabilities. It's very important to me. I imagine how it would feel for me to only have one cup of coffee a day at a time when someone else decides is the right time for me to drink my coffee. What would it feel like for me to not be able to just decide that I want a cup of coffee and to walk into my kitchen and make it? To possibly have to wait until the next day if I wanted a second cup. When we are looking at accessibility for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, this is the ultimate goal. Breaking down every movement in the home and working out how can this person be more supported and having more independence. We've spent a lot of time looking at each of the federal requirements. Here are important themes that we see come up all the time when we talk about HCBS. It's important to think about these ideas as we think about the lives of our loved ones and the support that they receive. Community, relationships, transportation, full access, privacy, dignity, respect, autonomy, accessibility, control of resources, access to food, positive control, legal residential agreement or lease, risk and benefit, presumed competence, adult status, and choice.
Of all these themes, we think choice might be the most important. There are so many places where people can make choices about their lives. In fact, we believe that people have the right to make choices about anything. But here are the major choice themes that came up in the federal language: roommates, physical environment, visitors, setting options, services and supports, and who provides them or staffing, life choices, daily activities, and interaction with others.
If the people you care about need more support, here are a few people you can reach out to. You can also remind them to reach out to the people in your close circles. Maybe that's you or another family member or friend. Maybe it's their service coordinator.
Thank you so much for being here. We hope that all of the information that we shared here with you today is helpful as you continue thinking about HCBS and continue thinking about the best way that you can support the person in your life.